Welcome to Radio Free XP, the podcast for pivots and friends of pivots everywhere. Today we're talking to Nat Bennett, author of the site simplermachines.com.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Nat Bennett. I joined Pivotal in, I want to say 2014, but sometimes I get the year off. But basically, I was a Cloud Foundry pivot, and just to time it, we had like two big customers at the time that I joined. We were just about to ship Diego. And make that a real thing. And we were just about to move to actual quarterly releases for Cloud Foundry. So we were kind of exiting the science project zone and getting into the, okay, let's like deploy this thing and scale it out zone. And so that's when I kind of came into Cloud Foundry. If you were on Cloud Foundry, my first team was, well, sort of my first team, but my first real team was Mega. Which got split out of runtime and then got responsibility for the release integration, release engineering stuff, along with a bunch of other odds and ends. So I spent a lot of my about 5 years at Cloud Foundry kind of floating around the release integration zone. I did a tour on Cloud Ops, worked on MySQL. And then since I left Pivotal, I left VMware. I went through the acquisition and I left VMware in 2020 and spent, I guess, a couple of years figuring out how to be a consultant and doing some like classic XP consulting, sort of living the post-labs life.
So thank you for that intro and the time and place at Pivotal. You know, for every first-time guest, the thing I really want to hear is like, what was your Pivotal is, a giant thing, and obviously you could probably spend the rest of your life writing about it. But there is this moment where you go from, I have never paired and I don't know what it's like, to that actual first 4 weeks where you're pairing. And for every guest, I love to hear that journey. So can you tell us about your journey to, like, what did you think it was going to be? What did you actually learn it's going to be? And what do you recommend for those people who might follow your journey?
Yeah. Do you mind if I give a little bit of backstory?
Do it any way you want.
I'm going to set the scene a little bit. So I actually learned to code on the job. I have an English degree. I had no training prior to getting on a job. And so I started learning to program at this Windows shop, and I started learning Ruby of all things. So that's a whole other story. That's very entertaining. If you're into that kind of thing. And because I'm learning Ruby, I'm getting exposed to TDD, pairing, XP, right? Like that community is in contact. And so I'm talking, I'm like, I want to try this pairing thing. And people at the shop that I'm working at, it's a .NET shop, it's very old school, are just like, nobody actually does any of that stuff. Like, this is not how it works in the real world. I'm like, okay, I think you're wrong, huh? So I go and I find some things, and I'm on the internet, and I find some people who are doing this, and I eventually land at Pivotal, because I'm like, these people are doing pairing and TDD. Yeah. Like they're doing it all the time, every day. Yeah. So I want to go there and see how it is. And I show up at Pivotal. I show up at Cloud Foundry on my first day, and they're like, great. We're going to put you on a 1-pair team with Jesse Alford, who I think he's been a guest on this podcast before. So you kind of know. So you're going to spend just your first 6 weeks of your time at Cloud Foundry pairing with one person, and it's Jesse. And you're going to be, we were testing, we were characterizing availability during the upgrade from, I think it was 1.4 to 1.5. So we were writing this like load testing script in Gatling, I think, a Scala framework for driving traffic. And then looking at, running a deploy, and just looking at, well, what endpoints go down during this deploy, and like, are we actually highly available? Which was a really fun project to be working on. And it was kind of a crash course in pairing because Jesse's very, well, one, this is not necessarily going to sound insane as a plan to people who have not done a lot of pairing, but like famously pairing with one person for extended periods of time is challenging. I actually live with Jesse now, and a big part of why we live together today and like have had the like long association that we've had is that we came out of that last 6 weeks and we were like, I don't hate hanging out with you. I would like to keep doing this. This is very rare. This is very unusual. So those first 6 weeks were weird, because I was pairing with one person. I was pairing with somebody who takes pairing just like really seriously. People came to Cloud Foundry, people came to Pivotal for all kinds of reasons. Some of them it was because they were really intense, like pairing. This is great. I want to do this all the time. The craft, right? Some of them that's what. But a lot of people came because they were interested in the distributed system stuff. We were writing Go back when that was a really hot, cool thing. We were working with containers. I mean, we were working. This gets forgotten now, but we were working with containers before Docker. Like we were, people asked, well, why does Cloud Foundry not use Kubernetes on the inside? It's because it didn't exist when we started working on it. And so there was a time when people were, some people were like, okay, pairing is sort of the price of business, of doing business and working on these problems that I want to work on. But Jesse was very much like, and he took it very seriously because he was like trying to introduce me correctly. And so we did a lot of like very formal, very structured, like, I have the keyboard, now you have the keyboard, and we're going to retro every day. And that was interesting, but it also gave me kind of a skewed idea of what pairing was going to be like with most people. So that was a little bit of culture shock, I think, or something like it, where like I started pairing with normal people and I was like, oh, you're not putting 110% of yourself and your whole being into this pairing session. You're approaching this like it's just a job. And that was different. Learned a bunch of things during that section. He brought over actually a stoplight that measured sound. There was like a decibel meter because I was very, very loud because I wasn't used to regulating my volume when I was excited, basically. And this was just such a great like pivot solution to this problem. Was he just brought the sensor over and he brought it right next to me. And so I could see immediately when I was too loud, when I was hitting like 80 decibels, so which is, by the way, the OSHA standard for like you have to put hearing protection on. That's me. I'm a workplace hazard when I get excited. Yeah. What else about that like first 4 weeks of pairing? I mean, I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be pretty similar to what it was, honestly, of like just a sort of like intense, like working together with the person on a problem and just like really, really just jamming, right? Really just like doing improv with the person. I got that for my first 4 weeks. I think after pairing with Jesse, when I moved on to some other teams and had some different pairing experiences, I realized that like sometimes pairing is just one person watching the other person work, which can be good sometimes, but it's not always the full like we're drift compatible, Pacific Rim thing. It's not always that, right? I mean, sometimes it is, and when it is, it's great, but like sometimes people just don't have the energy level for that. I think skipping ahead a little bit, I was not prepared for how much pairing was going to change me as a person. This was something that I like tried to get to. One of the first things that I wrote on simplermachines.com was this piece about pairing, and the mortifying ordeal of pairing all day. And that went viral, for various reasons. And so it sort of escaped the ecosystem of like, that was targeted at a very specific audience and escaped that. And what a lot of people read from that, they skipped straight into the part of the piece that was about how hard pairing was for me. And like, I would write that piece super differently today, but that's sort of a like separate thing. And they just I tried to convey in the first couple of paragraphs of like, this was life changing. Like this really changed who I am. And people like don't want to believe that, but I went from somebody who was sort of a loner nerd who hated and resented group work, to somebody who like teamwork is my primary thing that I feel like I'm good at. And it just changed. I'm just like much more social, much more extroverted. And a lot of it was just this crash course in social interaction, basically, right? Like I didn't get that from school because I was like I was too far off the baseline from all the people around me to really get like the working basis of connection in school and that socialization. And so it was just like I just didn't get feedback, right? Because I just like I couldn't hook in to anything. And then I got to Pivotal, and not only am I suddenly surrounded by people who are kind of like me, and I'm getting that like lunch table thing happening, right? I'm hanging out with people and I'm having a good time, but also I'm pairing 8 hours a day. And so 8 hours a day I'm spending bouncing, sending a message and then evaluating the response that I get and going like, that's not what I expected to happen. That's not how I expected this person to react. So like, what is happening? And just like getting that, like being able to model other people. My social skills in general are just way better. My ability to make small talk is way better. Just like, I'm just much more social of a person. So yeah, pairing changed my life. Pivotal changed my life.
Yeah.
Totally different trajectory.
I had the same experience. I mean, our relationship, I don't know if we were ever actually on the same team, but we were on the kitchen team. Like, I would do that obnoxious thing of sitting on the kitchen counter and eating apple and peanut butter and
Yes,
talking to anyone who showed up, right?
yes,
We had so many good times.
Yeah.
So yeah, and and you've always been very articulate about what's going on and, how it fits with, the person you are and things like that. And thank you for sharing it. Right. You're a big inspiration to get back out there. Like, hey, let's rebuild this. So as we go there, what would you recommend to someone, first of all, I think we could say non-neurotypical at a minimum. Right.
Yeah.
And so someone who's non-neurotypical, especially, I just cannot tell you, it's the same thing. I was a lone wolf. My experience in school was if I got group work, it was my work. Like I would get bullied into doing the work. And so that made us strong. And then the transition I had is exactly yours, which is I got there and like, oh my gosh, you can work on a team and it's fun and good and amazing. Like I had no idea. Okay. So what would you say to someone who would regard themselves as non-neurotypical, or, like you said, you're just outside the kind of frame that works in an what I'll call an institution like a high school or a college. So you're outside that frame. What do you want to tell that person about pairing and what they should consider about it?
Yeah. What do I want to tell that person about pairing? Yeah, are we talking to somebody who's like still actively in high school or just whatever?
I think we're going to have to reach back pretty far, right? Like in terms of catching people in institutions. So if you're in high school and, I like that Dan Savage thing, it gets better. So what's your it gets better message to someone who's in high school? And then what's your it's get better message for someone in career?
So my it gets better message to like myself at teenager is get into computers. Like you're interested in computers, you're kind of scared of them. They seem really hard. There's this math stuff. No. Computers are the fun kind of math, which is logic and proofs, and right, it's not based on memorization. It's not the trigonometry, quadratic equation stuff that makes no sense. Computers are fun. They do what you tell them to do, which is just so incredibly calming, right? Of like, unlike other people, computers do what you tell them to do, for good or for ill, right? But like, it's good. And computers are a pathway to finding people like you, So, if computers aren't your passion, like there's probably something else, but like really seriously, if you're a weird feeling teen, I think really seriously consider, and you find computers attractive at all, interesting at all, follow that. there's all this stuff about AI and like how computers programming is going to go away. Yeah, in the 90s, all the computer jobs were going to get shipped overseas. Right? It was all going to be this low value stuff. And I think Google, Airbnb, all these companies would sort of stand as like there's going to be work for people who can sort of force their brains into working in the logical, really super literal way that computers do. And if you can understand that hyper literalism of the computer, there's going to be work, and there's going to be people like you. And the second thing that I will say, I guess, and we get into like the pairing thing, is that pairing with someone who is also computer capable, right? Who also has whatever that thing in your brain is that like you can understand a Boolean statement, right? And is reasonably friendly is a really, really different experience from doing any kind of close work with somebody who doesn't share that common piece of ground or is a jerk. And there's a lot of those people, right? Like you may have seen The Social Network, right? Like there is this kind of bro-y thing. There's people who are just in it for the money, right? There's people who are super insecure and they use their mastery over computers as a way to feel better about themselves, right? Like all those people exist. But there are, I'm forgetting who says this, but I love this phrase, friendly and ambitious nerds. There's a guy on Twitter who that's his phrase. And there's people out there and there are companies that select for them. And pairing is just an incredibly good way to find yourself in an environment full of really smart, really pro-social, really friendly people. And this is a pathway to just shocking amounts of money, frankly. So I highly recommend this as like a life career path. Especially if, like me, you kind of missed out on, I didn't really click with even the college experience, right? And so pivotal for me was very much that like I'm hooked into a community thing. And so that's and especially if you're if you're queer in any way, if you're trans, if you're any of that, if you think you might be, computers. It's not possible to keep a website up without trans people. Like I'm sorry, but a large scale website can't be run without there's so many trans people, there's so many queer people in SRE, that if you are, I mean, that's my real like core it gets better thing, is if you can get yourself computer knowledge, and you want to be, if you're an anxious gay furry, right? The best thing that you can do is get into computers, because you will get to be surrounded by other gay furries, and again, make just really shocking amounts of money, because they need you. So yeah, that's my pitch.
Yeah, I'll pivot off of that and to say that if you're a person who is hyper vigilant in any way, if you're if you're extremely socially aware to the point that it ruins your life, and that's just what I would expand it all the way out to that. There's a way to have that channeled and managed and functionalized in a way that's not like, oh, this is better than that other thing. It's like, oh my gosh, this is insanely gratifying, meaningful, and as you say, it beyond money, you're linked into the live wire of success is actually how I think of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a great invitation. So one last thing, you're a person who's in the industry, you've been in for 5, 10, whatever, even 20 years. What do you want to say to that person who's has possibly burned out many times? What do you want to say to that person?
Yeah. I think the big thing that I would say is that there is a lot of variation between companies and between environments, and that even having three or four or five bad experiences with a company with companies in a row. Like that happens. Like sometimes you're flipping a coin and you get heads 10 times. Like that happens. Um, and don't. I think the big thing that I have to say to folks in that situation is that like you don't necessarily need to jump all the way to quitting tech. There are ways to pull out a little bit of tech. Like I just went through a period of doing mostly consulting and contracting, for instance. And one of the things that I really loved about that was that I could work like half the year on client stuff and still make like enough money, basically. Um, and so this is one of my like little soapboxy things is like I'll see people talk about like, oh, I want to quit tech, I want to get out of tech, I'm so burnt out, like this is terrible. And I'm like, well, one, the stuff that you're talking about, the racism, the sexism, the whatever it is, it ain't better in the rest of corporate America, really. I mean, it can be in some places, but like, and tech does have some specific things going on with it, but like, it's also just got this really high leverage thing happening, right? Where I think the work that software people do is really, really legible to businesses. I mean, it's not in some ways, right? There's this famous, like, it's hard to estimate and businesses don't understand that. But, like, software people, even if, as an example, Google, right? Business people at Google, they don't need to know anything about how AdSense works, how the search, how MapReduce works. But they can see a spreadsheet that shows them how much money that software is making them. And they can see how few people relative to the amount of money were needed to build that software, right? And so like it's really easy for business people to see, oh, people who can do computer stuff, people who can apply leverage to business processes, super valuable. I need some of those. And there are ways to turn being able to do those things into whatever it is that you want, whether that's more time, more space, more money, a very, very specific kind of company that you want to work at. It does require networking, right? Like it does require spending time talking to people. But you can really kind of craft your own situation in tech to a degree that I think is unusual outside of it. Certainly, I mean, partially this is my field, right? Like I know how to do this. And yeah, and I think there's a tendency to look at, I think increasingly over the last few years, I've realized that like there's a tendency for me to go, okay, I had this terrible, terrible experience, late Pivotal, early VMware. And there's a temptation for me to go, okay, well, like all huge companies are awful and I don't like them. Well, no, like I had a bad specific experience that has a lot to do with the specific things that were happening. By the way, there was a global pandemic, like that maybe was a factor. And so I think there's a real danger of like over learning from one particular situation. And taking time off. I mean, that's the other thing is like if you're burned out, like time not doing things or time just spent doing whatever you want to do, no matter what that is like that's so incredible.
Yeah, agreed. All right, perfect. We've got it. It gets better for our young listeners and folks in career. Nat, thank you. Like,
Yeah.
Your journey is like you've just been very public about it. You're super clear and you're out there. So thank you for that.
Yeah.